Hey guys, it's Dr. Justin Marchegiani here. Today we're going to do a live video on the top 5 ways to know if you're insulin resistant, right? We're going to dive into insulin resistance, blood sugar issues, metabolic syndrome, and we'll talk about how to detect it and pick it up. Before we do, please smash that like button. Really appreciate it. It helps the search algorithm. Also, put your comments down below. Let me know about your weight issues, insulin, metabolic stress issues. Love to hear about it below in the comments. Awesome. All right, so let's dive in. So first off, what is insulin resistance? So insulin is essentially a hormone. It's let's call it a partitioning hormone. It helps open the cells up and brings primarily glucose, and it can fructose as well, into the muscle or a liver as well. So it can bring primarily glucose more into the muscle, fructose more into the liver typically, but it opens that door up and allows that gate to be opened and brings the sugar molecules into the muscle or the liver and allows it to be burnt for fuel. Now, if those tissues, if that muscle or the liver tissue is saturated with glycogen, right, which is going to be stored glucose or stored fructose. It's already in that tissue. It's already saturated. Insulin then will start to convert that glucose or that sugar molecule into fat. And so it's either going to take it, it's going to put it in that metabolic tissue to store or burn up, or it's going to shift it into long-term storage, which is going to be fat. And so essentially insulin resistance is when your body starts to become numb to bring that glucose or that sugar molecule into your into your liver, into your muscle to store or burn it. It starts to accumulate at higher levels in the bloodstream. So typically it would come inside the muscle, inside the liver. Now it can't. The cell's numb to it. It's not opening up that door. It's not sending out those GLUT4 receptor sites. So it's starting to accumulate in the bloodstream. And typically conventional medicine is what? They're using like blood sugar in the morning, usually 126 milligrams per deciliter is the diabetes conversion. Pre-diabetes, I think now is at 110. A lot of functional medicine people are using anything fasting in the morning above 100 or 105 as maybe a pre-diabetes marker. So these are all markers to assess how much that glucose is accumulating in the bloodstream. And the essence is that, hey, those receptor sites are numb, right, to insulin, aka insulin resistance. We're not able to open that door up to the cell to bring glucose in to store or burn inside the muscle or the liver. Therefore, it's accumulating in the bloodstream. That's insulin resistance. Now, insulin resistance is the hallmark of metabolic syndrome, because when you have high levels of blood sugar and high levels of insulin, it starts to create higher levels of blood pressure, because with high levels of insulin in the bloodstream, it's going to hold on to more fluid. You'll be more puffy, you'll be more inflamed, more fluid. That's going to increase blood pressure. That's going to start to make the heart have to pump harder to get blood moving. It's going to create inflammation in the arteries, especially the small arteries and capillaries of the eyes. They start to become inflamed. The cells start to agglutinate. They start to stick together, and they don't flow as well. So you may start to see inflammation in the eyes. You may start to see finger and toe neuropathies due to depletion of B vitamins and magnesium. When you consume lots of glucose or fructose, you start to have metabolic issues because you have to use B vitamins and magnesium to process these sugars. And so it's like a transaction fee. And if you're eating lots of processed refined carbohydrate and you're not getting the nutrition back in, like the B vitamins or the magnesium, you have a transaction fee, and you could actually start depleting those nutrients because you're eating too much processed refined foods over here. So you start to have difficulty having good blood flow to the extremities, the hands, the feet, the fingers. You may start to have inflammation there, like gangrenous tissue over time, because now you don't have good white blood cell flow, and now you have an infection at the extremity tips, usually in the feet, the toes, and it doesn't heal. And that tissue becomes rotten essentially, and you have to have the tissue either cut out or the limb cut out. Not good, not fun. All right, and then of course, so blood pressure comes up. Of course, the insulin meter in the body is going to be the belly, right? So if that belly starts to expand here in this area, that's usually an insulin cortisol meter. So so I'll talk about strategies at the end. So here, the circumference around the waist is going to be a big one. Fasting glucose above 110, 120 is going to be a good sign. I don't love the glucose because other things can influence glucose besides diet. Just stress response in the morning. There's what's called the Somogyi effect or the dawn phenomenon, where blood sugar can drop. It can trigger a cortisol response, and then your blood sugar goes up not because of insulin resistance, but because of high levels of cortisol or stress hormone. So then you may get a false positive. Also, people that go get pricked with a needle, that may be a stress response to someone, and that may create more blood sugar increases, not because of the diet and the insulin resistance, but more because of the stress response that's driving that. So you have to be very careful with that. So regards to glucose, I'm not a huge fan of fasting glucose. Odds are if you're fasting glucose is really high though, in the 120s and up, there probably is some insulin resistance, but we never let that be the only dictator of that. We'd want to look at fasting insulin. I want it below 7, 2 and 5, 2 to 5 is ideal. Ideally below 7, definitely not in the double digits. 10 and up, above 7 or 10 or up definitely is a problem with insulin resistance. Functional glucose testing is much better. So there's typical glucose tolerance where they give you a 75-gram solution of glucose, which is like the equivalent of like a soda or two, and then they test your blood sugar before and then 1, 2, and 3 hours after. Don't love it because it may not be indicative of what you typically consume during the day. And so unless you're consuming sodas during the day, it may not really be indicative of what your diet is doing to your blood sugar. So I actually like mimicking that with real food. So we may take our blood sugar at a random breakfast, lunch, or dinner, make sure it's at least 4 hours from your last meal, get a fasting reading, and then consume your meal, and then do a 1, 2, and 3 hour reading. Ideally, in a perfect world, we want that blood sugar, not to go over 140, but between 140 to 120 or less in the first hour, 120 to 100 or so in the second hour, and are back below 100 in the third hour. And it can be back below 100 in the second hour too. That's fine. We just don't want it to go up that high, and we want it to get back down there inside of 2 to 3 hours. And it's an indirect test, right? Because we know it's like push-pull. The more we produce glucose on one side, we know the beta cells on the pancreas that produce insulin are making insulin on the other side to bring it down. And so the higher it goes up, we know the more insulin. If the lower it goes up, right, the less insulin. So it's an indirect measurement of how insulin is being secreted. And so it's helpful to know where that's at. And ideally, we want our glucose to snake along like this. The more that glucose snakes along, the less insulin on the high and the less cortisol or adrenaline on the low. Because people that actually do too much carbohydrates, you can have what's called reactive hypoglycemia, which is essentially your blood sugar goes up, your pancreas freaks out, over-secretes insulin and brings it down too low, and then your cortisol and adrenaline levels have to pick it back up, which creates anxiety and mood issues and irritability and shakiness, right? People that get shaky after a meal, right? That's because of this reactive hypoglycemia roller coaster that most people are on. And so first test we like to look at is a fasting glucose is okay, but we want to look at the higher end of the ranges. We would never just rely on that. We want to look at a functional glucose tolerance, right? That 140 to 120 hour 1, fasting, 140 to 120 hour 1, 120 or below hour 2, below 100 hour 3. That's a pretty good way to look at it. Fasting insulin 2 to 5, definitely below 7. That's your third indicator. You can run a hemoglobin A1C, which is okay. We want to be in the low 5s, 5.1, 5.2 is okay. A1C is not the best indication because it relies on your blood cells living 90 days or so and accumulating glucose on the outer A1C part of the hemoglobin. The healthier your red blood cells are, they may live longer than 90 days on average, and they may accumulate more glucose because they're living longer. And so because of that, you may have a little bit higher on the A1C and not be because of glucose. And so that's why if you look at A1C, you want to look at the other markers as well. And obviously, if you're anemic too, low iron, you may have an A1C like in the upper 3s because anemia causes your red blood cells to not live as long. They don't live as long. They don't develop the glucose over time, and they're going to be really low. But you could have someone that's anemic and has a ton of blood sugar problems, and they would never get picked up. So you gotta read between the lines. It may be okay to run an A1C, but it's not the only thing you want to base it on. If someone has good levels of insulin and a good functional glucose tolerance and their A1C is borderline, I'm not worried about it. Especially if their waist circumference is also okay, I'm not worried about it. And so big indicators out of the gates. Fasting insulin, glucose fasting, functional glucose tolerance, waist measurements. We want to be, ideally a guy, you want to be, 35 pan or below, woman 30 or below for the waist issue is going to be very helpful. Functional glucose tolerance, glucose fasting test, A1C, insulin, fasting insulin, and then our waist circumference. We could also throw in there a fructosamine, which is a 10-day window, a 10-day window into your sugar levels, and that's in the lower 200s of that would be okay. That's a 10-day window versus the A1C's, a 90-day window average. And then, of course, your functional glucose tolerance is right then and there at that meal. And then your insulin, fasting insulin is an even better marker because that's really what you're looking. You're looking for the insulin to be resistant, which means it has to increase. Because for the cells to become numb to it, your body starts to say, we're going to make more of it. And so fasting insulin is also going to be a gold standard marker to say, yeah, I have insulin resistance problems. And of course, the issues we're going to see is blood flow issues, cells getting sticky and agglutinated because of inflammation. So they don't get good blood flow to the eyes, hands, feet, finger, toes, brain, right? You may even see erectile dysfunction issues as a starting point of that. And then outside of that, of course, energy issues, because the higher levels of insulin makes it harder for your body to tap into fat, right? Lipolysis or hormone-sensitive lipase is going to be turned off with high levels of insulin. So lipolysis literally means lipo, fat, lysis, breaking. So the hormones to break down fat, hormone-sensitive lipase as well, they are inversely related to insulin. High levels of insulin, low fat burning, low fat breakdown. Low levels of insulin, higher fat breakdown, right? So when you're fasting, right, you have lower levels of insulin. So what happens? You start tapping it more into fat as well. You also can tap into muscle, but if you're intermittent fasting, that's a better way to do it. And so that's how we start to tap into more fat is we lower insulin levels. And the problem is when your insulin's high, you're going to be more glucose sugar burning, and the more sugar burning you are, the more you're going to have cravings throughout the day, and you're going to constantly have to eat because you're metabolically inflexible. You can't shift gears into that fat burning mode. So part of metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance is you lose metabolic flexibility. You lose the ability to go longer periods of time without eating. You lose the ability to burn fat adequately, which keeps you more stable in regards to your mood and your energy and your cravings during the day. So hope you enjoyed today's video. I look at hormone patients all the time with blood sugar issues, insulin resistance, thyroid issues. Of course, cortisol is that other part of this because high levels of cortisol and inflammation can mobilize glucose. Yes, you can have more glucose and sugar mobilization in your body because of inflammatory foods. That's part of the X factor independent of their glucose levels. So those are all good things to look at. I work with patients like this all the time on the cortisol, adrenal, thyroid, insulin connection. If you want to reach out, feel free, click down below. There'll be a link for you to reach out and schedule with myself and my colleagues here to be able to help you out to get to the next level. If you enjoyed today's video, give me a thumbs up. Put your comments down below. Let me know your thoughts on the video, what resonated with you the most, and I really appreciate your time here today. You guys have a phenomenal day. All right, let's open it up for questions. What is cooking, y'all? I'm going to skip questions that do not pertain to the topic, just so you know. All right, I had a chiropractor say that if I were metabolically healthy, we shouldn't feel a change in energy after eating. Well, it depends. If you eat too much food in general, that can definitely make you feel tired, right? Like think about Thanksgiving. You eat a lot of turkey, right? There's also tryptophan in there that makes you feel tired. If you overeat, that could be an issue. If you do too much carbohydrate, that could be an issue too. So if you eat a lighter meal that's not too much carbs, you should feel pretty good unless there's maybe a food allergy issue. When I eat carbs, I retain lots of water, which makes me crave salt. Also suffer with low blood pressure and weakness. Is that a sign of adrenal fatigue? Yeah, it definitely can be. Now, when you eat carbs, you surge insulin. When you surge insulin, water follows insulin. That's why people that lose a lot of weight going low carb in the first couple of days, they're just losing water, right? Insulin falls, carbs drop, glucose drops, insulin drops. When insulin drops, the water drops. So out of the gates, if you have lower levels of cortisol function or adrenal function, you probably have lower levels of aldosterone function. So you want to add in some sea salt, Redmond sea salt, or you can use some of my potassium synergy that has some magnesium and potassium in there as well, because potassium and magnesium will not be in their sea salt, but that'll at least give you a little bit of minerals there as well. And you got to work on the adrenals. Okay, very good. Pretty low fasting insulin, 3.4. Thought that was good, but not doing well. Low carb, do 2,000 calories a day. Can work out, but I feel brain foggy and can't make decisions at all. What's happening? So there could be other issues with the guts, with poor digestion. That could be a problem. Again, one of the best things to do to help with insulin resistance is put on muscle, because when you lift, you're depleting the muscles of glycogen, so it gives you more of a reservoir to pull more glucose or fructose into those tissues to store it, which takes it out of the bloodstream, which makes your cells more sensitive to insulin. And then also you grow your muscles. And so you make a bigger reservoir for those different things, and you add more GLUT4 receptor sites to pull that glucose into your bloodstream or out of your bloodstream to use it, which then helps make your cells more sensitive. So there could be some gut stuff going on. Okay. Thanks, Dr. J. I watch your show. I'm anemic too and vegan. What should I do? Well, you shouldn't be vegan. Number one, not a big fan of being vegan. Most vegans are carbitarians. If you look at what a vegan eats, it's like 70 to 80% carbs. And they tend to do way too much processed carbohydrate. You can do it decent if you're a vegan. Like if you're doing like lots of avocado oil, coconut oil, if you're getting some kind of a pea protein supplement in there, that can be helpful. If you're doing lots of good vegetables and you're not eating tons of grains, if you don't have a nut allergy, that helps. If you have issue with nuts, that's going to be really hard. So you can do it decent if you do avocados and coconuts and then really good seeds and nuts that are soaked, and you break down the anti-nutrients. If you avoid the soy, if you do lots of good vegetables, you dial in the carbs, you could probably do it. It's hard for most, especially if you are naturally more carb sensitive. It's really hard. People that do well going vegan, they do the things I mentioned that I just told you, and they tend to be more carb resilient. They can just handle more carbs anyway. And then of course they're going to have to get some kind of a fish oil or at least an algae supplement to get more omega-3s in, because you're not going to be able to convert 80 to 90% of the omega-3s in like ALA fats from flax won't get converted. So you have to be smart with that. And of course you may need extra B12 and you may need extra iron support, because you're just not going to get that. The animal heme iron is far superior than a plant heme iron. Hope that helps. Again, people make the whole vegan animal thing debate like it's an emotional debate for 95% of people out there. My whole thing about it is, number one, there are healthy versions of animals that are hormone-free, antibiotic-free, and really, farmed and taken care of sustainably. You kill lots of things when you raise plants. Like if you look at monoculture plants, the combines that roll through there are destroying rabbits and snakes and gophers and squirrels and all kinds of other animals. And, to put the value of like that squirrel's life is worth less than the cow. I don't know how you do that, right? I can't rationalize that. And so I think all life is valuable. And the question is, how do you get the most amount of nutrition with killing the least amount of animals, right? That's kind of how I look at it, or plants, right? And so I think the best way to do that is be a responsible omnivore/carnivore. Good questions, though, out of the gates. Let me continue to roll here, guys. Mom has stage 3 chronic kidney disease, aching limbs, sleeplessness. Her serum potassium 75 to 115, magnesium less than 30. Yeah, the problem when you have chronic kidney disease is she may need those minerals, but the problem is her kidneys may not be able to handle them. So the goal would be to increase those minerals to a level that she can handle without causing stress on her kidneys. And that may be hard, so you may want to talk to her doctor about that. That's managing it and then testing that. So she may need some, but not so much where it puts stress on her kidneys. People that have kidney disease issues, why? Usually there's 80% of all kidney disease and transplants are actually going to diabetics. And so we know high blood sugar tends to be what drives that. So doing a really good keto diet with super high fats, lower protein, lower carbs tends to be helpful. Protein can be stressful on the kidneys when there's already damage to it. Protein never is the thing that hurts the kidneys, but when they're already hurt, it can be a stressor. So you may want to drop that protein, drop the carbs, lots and lots of good fats, adjust the electrolytes according to what she can handle. Don't overdo it. When the kidneys are damaged, you kind of have to compromise on that. But still make sure there's some in there. Okay. I'm going to try to keep it to blood sugar, guys. Would you guys have Dr. Karazian on your show? Yeah, I've met Dr. Karazian a couple times when I was in school. I think I saw him in the 2005 or 6 in a conference a couple times. So I've definitely hung out with him before. He's a great guy. He knows a lot. Definitely would be a good option. I try my best to stay hydrated as well. Half ounce of body weight. Half an ounce per pound of body weight, essentially, with electrolytes. That's good. I like that. Very good. Okay. What wearable or sensors would you recommend to measure blood sugar? Yeah, so there's like the Freestyle Libre out there. There's one more that's out there as well. I forget what it's called. You can check those out. I think they're good. I've heard there's a 20 to 30% error rate in the glucose levels. So you can keep an eye on that. I don't think it's quite accurate enough. Get it if you want. I think just using the old-fashioned blood glucose strips. I got mine. It was behind here. Maybe on the corner of my desk. Just old-fashioned blood glucose strips. Do a fasting 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour. If you want to compare it to the Libre or something, that's cool. How long should I cycle ashwagandha on and off? I mean, you can be on that longer term. A couple years isn't a problem. If you want to come off it every 3 to 6 months or so and maybe throw in a different adaptogen while you're off it, I think that's cool. Stephen Buhner talks about ashwagandha being used long terms in many cultures. So I think ashwagandha is good. Just make sure it's good quality. I test my ashwagandha for lead and other chemicals. A lot of ashwagandha can be bought from areas of the world that have a lot of mercury in the soil or lead in the soil. So you want to make sure you don't buy the cheap stuff, get good quality stuff that's tested. How much protein do you recommend for a young 150-pound person? Depends how active they are. Anywhere between a half a gram per pound to 1 gram per pound if you're lifting a lot. How do you reverse insulin resistance? Well, you work on a healthy lower carb paleo template that focuses on nutrient dense, anti-inflammatory, low toxin foods. You restrict carbohydrates, less than 50 to 30 net grams per day. And you add in at least some walking or some resistance exercise. And then you can add in on things on the supplement side. You can add in B vitamins. You can add in fish oil. You can add in magnesium. You can add in ALA. You can add in things like bitter melon. You can add in things like gymnema, cinnamon. These are all excellent things to add in. In my line, we would just add in my multi-support pack. We'd add in something called Glucose Synergy, which has the magnesium and the chromium in there, and it has some cinnamon, and it has some vanadium. And then make sure you're getting 10,000 steps a day. Make sure you're getting some level of resistance training in. That makes a big difference. All right, guys, I'm going to do 1 or 2 more questions here. Notice sometimes I do a glucose test before food, 80 to 90, but after eating it, it's the same, sometimes a little less. Is that hypoglycemic? Sometimes if I eat a lot, it goes up as expected. It just depends upon what that looks like. What's fasting 1, 2, 3 hours look like? If it goes to from 80 to 90 and it's 75, it's probably okay. That's not a big, huge drop. I'd be curious to know what hour 2 and 3 look like, and 4 potentially. As long as you're not feeling jittery or feeling shaky, that's probably okay. You may want to add a little bit more carbs in and see if you feel better. You may be okay to add a little more carbs in. And I'd experiment with that as long as hours 2, 3, and 4 look okay. How do I lose weight without feeling hungry? So the first thing is start getting fat adapted, because ketones send strong satiating signals to your brain that allow you to feel satiated. Eat till you're about 80% full. The big issue that people make on a keto, kind of when they're more fat adapted, is they eat till they're 100% full. And the problem is there's like a 10-20 minute delay in their brains thinking they're satiated. So you eat till you're 100% full, 10-20 minutes later, now you feel stuffed. So the key is just don't overeat. And so eating that way makes you feel very satiated. Just try to eat till you're about 80% full. Give yourself 10 minutes at least. See how you feel then. You'll probably be closer to 90% plus full. You want to feel satiated but be comfortable enough to move around, do a squat, walk around. Not so you're feeling Thanksgiving full. Because you can easily add an extra 100 to 200 calories by getting stuffed at the end of the meal. Not that calories are the issue, but we want to be able to walk away from the meal feeling satiated, not over-satiated. All right, guys, hope that makes sense. A lot of good questions here. Let's bring it back for another maybe live Q&A tomorrow. I'll be back, and we will dive in. Again, I do most of these depending on my schedule. If I have a gap in my schedule without a patient, I'll jump on here. If I have a lunchtime and I'm finished on time, I'll come on here like I did today and do a video at lunch. So I'm glad that you guys are tuning in and you enjoy the content. Appreciate the thumbs up. Appreciate the reviews. Appreciate the comments.